You are asleep. The sound comes first. Not loud, but wrong. Iron on stone. The deliberate pace of men who don't need to hurry because no door will stay closed to them. Your husband stirs beside you. You pray he wakes, then pray he doesn't. The footsteps stop. 3 pounds on oak. Fist, not knuckle. You know this sound. Everyone in London knows this sound. It's the summoner. The bishop's man. Your stomach empties into your throat. This isn't about your husband. He could beat you, divorce you, cast you into the street. That would be family business, a private humiliation. But this is the church. The smell hits you when they pull you into the street. February mud, night soil, the sour wool stench of the summoner's cloak. He doesn't touch you, doesn't need to. He unfurls a parchment, and even in the pre-dawn dark you can see the wax seal. Red. Episcopal. The paper rattles in the wind, and you catch 3 words. Corpus delicti, crimen adultery. Your body is the crime. You're not being sued. You're being arrested, and the thing waiting for you isn't your husband's anger or your neighbour's gossip. It's something far older, far colder. It's a machine that's been waiting for you since before you were born. This wasn't madness. This was architecture. We tell ourselves stories about the medieval period. Stories of knights and romance, of chivalric codes and courtly love. We imagine a brutal time, yes, but a simple one. Passions ran high. Justice was rough. But here's what we miss. Nothing about the persecution of adulteresses was passionate. It was bureaucratic, calculated, profitable. The monster in this story isn't a person. It's the moment when the church and the state realized they could monetize female sexuality by redefining it as a cosmic crime. Let's go back to the beginning, to the invention. In the year 800, if a woman committed adultery, it was a family problem. Roman law, Germanic custom, even early Christian teaching treated it as a private wound. The husband could divorce her, demand compensation, publicly shame her within the community. But it ended there. The state didn't care. The church offered penance, not prosecution. Then came the 11th century, the Gregorian Reform. Pope Gregory VII and his successors had a problem. They were trying to centralize power, to make the church the supreme authority over all moral life. But moral authority without enforcement is just suggestion. They needed teeth. They needed crime, so they found one. A monk named Gratian, working in Bologna around 1140, compiled what would become the foundational text of church law, the Decretum. Buried in its thousands of citations and precedents was a radical redefinition. Adultery was no longer a sin against a spouse. It was a sin against the very order of creation. It was theft of another man's property, yes, but more than that, it was cosmic treason. And here's the key logic that Gratian codified, the piece that explains the brutality, the counterfeit air. Consider the cold economics. In a world without DNA testing, a man's only link to immortality, his only guarantee that his labour would survive him, was his son. An adulteress wasn't just breaking a heart, she was a saboteur. To the medieval mind, she was a counterfeiter smuggling a stranger into the bloodline, threatening to redirect the entire family fortune to a bastard child. She was a biological bomb placed at the foundation of the estate. That is why the double standard existed. A husband's infidelity was a moral lapse. A wife's infidelity was an insurrection. It threatened the legitimacy of inheritance, the sanctity of property, the stability of society itself. The church didn't just make adultery a crime, they made female adultery an emergency. And once something is an emergency, the state can do anything. By 1200, ecclesiastical courts had the power to summon, investigate, and punish. By 1231, Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II had codified nasal amputation, cutting off the nose, as standard punishment for convicted adulteresses. Not for men, just women. It was written into law like a building code. The machine was operational. But the church only held the keys to heaven. To destroy a life on earth, they needed a partner. They needed the town, and the town didn't want prayers. They wanted payment. Here's what they don't tell you in the history books. Before the laws came the money. Town councils across Europe realized that a convicted adulteress could be stripped of her entire dowry, not returned to her family, not given to her husband, seized by the municipal authorities. In Toulouse, in Montpellier, in dozens of southern French towns, the ledgers show it clearly. Adultery prosecutions spiked in years when town coffers were empty. They weren't punishing immorality, they were collecting revenue. The church provided the moral framework, the state provided the muscle, and together they built a machine that would run for 500 years, grinding women into legal non-persons while filling municipal treasuries and reinforcing episcopal power. So here is the uncomfortable truth, the thing you'll miss if you're not paying attention. We call it the medieval period, as if it's ancient history, a primitive time before we knew better. But the systematic criminalization of female sexuality, the monetization of moral panic, the use of public humiliation as social control, that machinery was invented recently by people who wrote it down, debated it in universities, refined it in courts. They knew exactly what they were doing. And some of those machines are still running. Let's talk about the engineering, because that's what it was. Not chaos, not mob justice, not the passionate rage of betrayed husbands. This was process, procedure, a system so refined, so methodical, that it left paper trails we can trace across centuries. Welcome to the bureaucracy of shame. The first thing you need to understand is that by the 13th century, punishing adultery had become a multi-departmental operation. It required coordination between ecclesiastical courts, municipal authorities, guild masters, and in some cases the royal treasury. Each institution had a role, each had a stake. The process began with detection. In theory, adultery cases came to light through confession or witness testimony. In practice, they came through denunciation. Neighbours, rivals, former servants. The church incentivized reporting by offering reduced penance to informants. Some dioceses even paid cash bounties. Once accused, a woman was summoned to ecclesiastical court. The legal standard wasn't beyond reasonable doubt. It was common fame, fama publica. If enough people believed you were guilty, you were guilty. The court didn't need to catch you in the act. They needed reputation. Let me show you what this looked like on the ground. The consistory court records of Cerisy, France, 1314 to 1320 list 43 cases of suspected adultery. 41 involve women. 37 of those 41 women were convicted. The average fine was 6 livres, roughly 3 months' wages for a skilled labourer. But here's the pattern. 22 of those 37 women could not pay. Their property was seized. In 16 cases, the court records explicitly note goods sold at market to satisfy debt to church and town. They didn't just want confession, they wanted collateral, and if you couldn't pay... Then came the escalation. The technology of public shaming was sophisticated. It had been refined over decades, tested across jurisdictions, documented in legal treatises. The goal wasn't just humiliation, it was what we'd now call social death, the complete severing of the person from community. But before the procession comes the erasure. Imagine you are that woman in the cell. The door opens. It is not the priest. It is the town barber, the same man who trims your husband's beard. He carries shears, cold iron. He drags you to a wooden stool. He doesn't cut your hair to groom you. He hacks it. The long hair, the medieval symbol of your soul, your modesty, your womanhood, falls to the dirty floor. He leaves the scalp patchy, jagged. He makes you look mangy, diseased. He strips your identity before they strip your body. Then, and only then, does the procession begin. The carting, as it was called in England. The condemned woman would be stripped to her shift, sometimes naked from the waist up, and paraded through the town on a specific route designed for maximum visibility. Market Square, church steps, guild halls. The route was specified in the sentence. The day was chosen for market day, when crowds would be largest. But here's the calculated precision. Towns hired professionals to maximise the spectacle. The Rye Town accounts, 1382, show a payment of 4 pence to John Smith and his son for trumpeting and drumming at the punishment of Alice Brewer, adulteress. The Norwich Municipal Ledgers, 1428, record 8 pence paid to diverse persons for rough music and attendance at the correction of sinful women. This wasn't spontaneous mob outrage. This was contracted labour. The town was outsourcing the humiliation. The rough music, charivari in French, Katzenmusik in German, was acoustic torture. Pots, pans, cowbells, deliberately out-of-tune horns. The sound could be heard for half a mile. It announced the procession before it arrived. It made sleep impossible for the condemned woman in the nights before punishment. Some records describe the noise continuing for 3 days, stationed outside her home before the actual sentence was carried out. The goal was breaking, psychological collapse before physical punishment, and the physical punishment was equally systematic. Let me introduce you to the cucking stool. Not the Victorian-era dunking apparatus you might picture, that came later, sanitized for tourists. The medieval version was a chair fixed to a long wooden beam operated like a seesaw. The woman was strapped in and plunged repeatedly into water, but not clean water. The Northampton Borough Records, 1385, specify placement at the common pond where offal and waste congregate. Another ordinance from Bristol, 1391, requires the cucking stool to be placed where the kennels empty, kennels being the open sewage channels running through medieval streets. This wasn't about cleaning or cooling lust as the official language claimed. The water was filth. The goal was contamination, infection, disease. A medical fact: submersion in sewage-contaminated water causes dysentery, typhoid, cholera. The mortality rate from post-cucking infection is impossible to calculate, but the correlation is clear in burial records. Women disciplined by cucking stool appear in parish death registers within weeks at rates far exceeding normal mortality. They were executing women through infection while calling it correction. Here is the part that usually gets left out of the history books. We're told that medieval punishments were equally harsh for everyone, that justice was blind in its brutality, that men faced the same consequences as women for sexual crimes. This is a lie, and we can prove it with numbers. The Consistory Court of York, one of the best preserved ecclesiastical records in England, heard 2,176 cases involving sexual offences between 1350 and 1410. Of these, 1,847, 85%, involved female defendants. Of male defendants charged with adultery, exactly 43% received penance only, confession, prayer, fasting. Of female defendants charged with adultery, 9% received penance only. The rest received corporal punishment, fines they could not pay, or both. But here's the number that breaks the myth completely. In 60 years of records, not one single man received nasal amputation, branding, or permanent mutilation. For adultery, not one. The punishments we think of as medieval justice, the spectacular body-altering violence, were reserved almost exclusively for women. The system wasn't harsh, it was targeted. And the targeting had a financial logic. When a woman was convicted, her dowry reverted to municipal control. Not her husband, not her family, the town. This is explicit in the Statutes of Marseille, 1253. Women proven adulteresses forfeit all goods brought to marriage. The Statutes of Toulouse, 1202, go further. All properties held in her name, whether inherited or gifted, become property of the consulate. We can track this. The town ledgers of Montpellier show a category of income labelled bona mulierum criminalium, property of criminal women. In the fiscal year 1298, this category represents 11% of total municipal revenue. 11%. The town was financing road repairs and paying civic salaries with money seized from convicted adulteresses. The church got moral authority, the town got cash, the husband got revenge. Everyone benefited except the woman, who got erased. This is why prosecution rates spiked during economic downturns. When the 100 Years' War disrupted trade in southern France in the 1340s, adultery convictions in Avignon increased by 40%. When the Black Death depopulated northern Italy in 1348, Bologna's prosecutions doubled. Not because morality suddenly collapsed, because municipal budgets did. The machine ran on economic necessity. Now let's talk about the evolution of punishment. Because the system didn't stay static, it innovated. By the early 13th century, fines and public shaming weren't enough. The legal scholars and church reformers wanted permanence. They wanted a punishment that would outlast the moment, that would mark the woman for life, that would prevent her from ever returning to normal society. They wanted mutilation. Frederick II, Holy Roman Emperor, codified it in the Constitutions of Melfi, 1231. The language is precise, medical. Adulteresses shall suffer amputation of the nose by a skilled chirurgeon, so that the face which inspired unlawful lust shall bear perpetual witness to sin. Rhinotomy. Nasal amputation. Clean removal of the nose structure, leaving the nasal cavity open, the bone exposed. The procedure was surgical, done by barber-surgeons, not executioners. It was designed to keep the woman alive, because death would be mercy. The goal was decades of visible disfigurement, and it worked, because once your nose was gone, you couldn't hide what you were. You couldn't enter churches without causing scandal. You couldn't work in households. You couldn't remarry, obviously. You couldn't even beg effectively. Deformity without tragic cause generated disgust, not pity. You became a living ghost, visible but socially erased. The Statute of Siena, 1262, is even more explicit about the goal. So marked, she shall serve as warning to all, women of the wages of lustful sin, and shall not tempt men again by beauty now destroyed. They weren't punishing the crime. They were preventing the possibility of future temptation. Removing a woman's ability to be desired was considered crime prevention. Think about that logic. The crime is adultery. The solution is making her unfuckable. The legal system had determined that female attractiveness itself was a public hazard that needed to be managed through disfigurement. By the 14th century, the machine was running at full efficiency. Detection through denunciation. Conviction through reputation. Punishment through spectacle and permanent marking. Revenue through property seizure. And all of it documented, filed, archived in ledgers that survive to this day. This wasn't the Dark Ages. This was high medieval Europe, the age of universities and cathedrals and Thomas Aquinas. These were literate, educated men designing a systematic approach to destroying women's lives. And here's what should terrify you. They wrote it all down because they thought they were doing the right thing. The machine didn't think it was monstrous. It thought it was moral. Let me take you to Siena, March 1267, a Thursday, market day. The woman's name is Margherita di Tommaso. We know this because the municipal records survive. She's 31 years old, convicted of adultery with a wool merchant. Her husband testified against her. 3 neighbours confirmed the common fame. The consistory court took 4 hours to deliberate. The sentence was unanimous: rhinotomy, nasal amputation, public square, maximum attendance required. The procedure begins at 9 in the morning. This isn't arbitrary. 9 o'clock ensures full market crowd. Vendors have set up, shoppers are arriving, the square is packed. The town has hired criers to announce the punishment since dawn. They've been walking the streets. Witness God's justice. Witness the wages of sin. 9 o'clock Piazza del Campo. By the time they bring Margherita out, there are 400 people in the square. We know the number because the town paid for crowd control. 6 constables at 2 soldi each, recorded in the accounts. She's been in a cell beneath the Palazzo Pubblico for 3 days. No sleep. The charivari players have been stationed outside her window, rotating in shifts. Pots, bells, drums, constant. The goal is disorientation, the severing of time sense, the breaking of will before the breaking of bone. When she walks, or rather when she's dragged, she's already half gone. Eyes unfocused, lips moving but no sound. The crowd parts. This is important. They don't press close. There's a circle of empty space around her, perhaps 10 feet in diameter. She's already contaminated, already dead to them. The platform is in the centre of the square, 4 feet high so everyone can see. The barber surgeon is waiting. His name is Paolo di Giunta. He's not an executioner, he's a respected medical professional. He treats the wealthy, he sets bones, he delivers babies. And twice a year, on average, he performs municipal amputations. He's laid out his instruments on a white cloth. We know what they looked like because similar kits survive in medical museums. A small curved blade, probably 6 inches long. A cauterizing iron, already heating in a brazier. Clean linen for packing the wound. Wine for disinfection. Of the instruments, not the patient. 4 men strap Margherita to a wooden chair. Heavy leather restraints. Arms, legs, torso, forehead. The forehead restraint is crucial. The head cannot move. One jerk at the wrong moment and the blade cuts too deep, severs the facial artery, and she bleeds out. That's not the sentence. The sentence is survival. Paolo inspects her face. He's checking the anatomy, the placement of cartilage, the angle of bone. He's done this before. He knows exactly where to cut. You are Margarita. The leather across your forehead is wet. You don't know if it's your sweat or someone else's blood. The smell is copper and fear and the smoke from the brazier. You can't see the knife, but you can hear it. The surgeon testing the edge against a whetstone. That high, singing sound. Sharp metal on stone. The crowd is roaring, but you can't make out words anymore. It's just noise. Static. Your world has shrunk to the 6 inches of space in front of your face where Paolo is standing. He says something. You don't understand. Your husband is in the crowd somewhere, but you can't find him. You try to speak, to beg, but your throat has closed. Nothing comes out. Paolo's hand touches your face. Clinical. Impersonal. A thumb and forefinger on either side of your nose, measuring. The knife appears. You try to pull back, but the restraint holds. Your eyes can move, that's all. You can see the blade getting closer. It's clean, polished. You can see your own reflection in it, distorted. And then, the first cut is fast, precise. A single motion around the base of the nose following the natural crease where cartilage meets face. Blood immediately, more than you'd expect. The crowd noise changes. A collective intake of breath, then louder, excited. This is what they came for. Paolo works quickly. He has to. The patient is conscious, struggling despite the restraints. The body's survival instinct doesn't care about the sentence. Second cut, vertical, severing the columella, the strip of tissue between nostrils. The nose is now separated from the face except for the upper bridge. Margarita is screaming, or trying to. The sound is wrong, wet, gurgling. Blood is running down her throat. Her body is trying to breathe through a nose that's no longer structurally intact. Third cut. This is the difficult one. Paolo has to cut through the nasal bone at the bridge, where it meets the skull. He uses a different tool for this. A small saw, maybe 3 inches long. The sound is worse than the screaming. Bone on metal. Bone. Scraping. The grinding vibration travelling through the skull. Margarita's eyes are open, fully dilated. She's looking at Paolo, but she's not seeing him anymore. She's somewhere else. The mind has ejected. This is pure animal survival. The body alone, no consciousness. 40 seconds. That's how long the sawing takes. We know because later surgical manuals will describe the procedure and time it. Then, separation. The nose comes free. Paolo holds it up for a moment. This is part of the ritual, the display of the removed sin, and the crowd erupts. Cheering, applause. They're celebrating. He drops the nose into a basin. It lands with a soft, wet sound. Now the face is a hole, raw, red. Bone visible at the bridge where the nasal structure attached. The nasal cavity is completely exposed. You can see into her skull. Blood is sheeting down, covering her mouth, her chin, soaking into her shift. Paolo moves to cauterization. The iron comes out of the brazier, glowing. This is to stop the bleeding, to seal the major vessels. He works section by section. The smell is immediate. Burning flesh, burning blood, protein cooking. Margarita isn't screaming anymore. She's making a sound that isn't human. A keening, high-pitched, constant. The sound of something fundamental breaking inside. The cauterization takes 3 minutes. When it's done, Paolo packs the wound with linen soaked in wine and honey. This is medical best practice. He's trying to prevent infection. He wants her to live, because death would be mercy. They leave her on the platform for 2 hours. This is specified in the sentence, display of correction. The crowd is supposed to witness not just the punishment, but the aftermath, the consequence, the permanent destruction. Margarita is still strapped to the chair, still conscious. The keening has stopped. Now there's just breathing, ragged, wet, through a wound instead of a nose. Some people in the crowd have left, others have stayed, eating, talking. Children playing at the edge of the platform. This is public space. Market day continues. At 11 o'clock they unstrap her. She can't stand. 2 constables have to carry her down. They take her to the hospice attached to San Domenico, not for treatment, but for containment. She'll stay there 3 weeks while the wound scabs over. During that time, 6 other women will be brought to look at her. Part of their own sentences for lesser crimes, forced witness, preventative terror, 4 weeks later. The bandages come off. Margarita is alone in a small room, stone walls, 1 window. A nun has brought a basin of water and a polished metal mirror. She needs to see. She needs to understand what she is now. The nun leaves. Margarita doesn't look immediately. She sits on the edge of the bed, hands in her lap. She can feel the difference, the weight gone from the centre of her face, the cold air flowing directly into her skull through the cavity, the wrongness. She stands, walks to the basin, looks down at the water first. The reflection is distorted, rippling. She can't quite see. She picks up the mirror, raises it slowly, stops, hand shaking. She knows what she's about to see. She lifts it the final inch, and there it is. A skull with skin, 2 eyes, a mouth, and where the nose should be, nothing. A black hole. Bone showing at the edges, the scar tissue already forming, pink and shiny and permanent. She is 29 years old. She will live another 37. Every single day she will wake up and remember this moment. The mirror doesn't shake. Her hand has gone completely still. She's looking at herself, but it's not herself anymore. The person who was Margarita di Tommaso died on a platform in the Piazza del Campo. This is someone else, something else, a warning, an object lesson, a ghost wearing her memories. She sets the mirror down, very carefully, face up, so she doesn't have to see the reflection again. Then she sits and waits. For what? She doesn't know. There's nothing to wait for. Her life is over. She's just still breathing. Margarita di Tommaso dies in 1304, 37 years after the amputation. She's 68 years old. The cause of death listed in the San Domenico hospice records is corruption of the face. What this means medically is chronic infection. The exposed nasal cavity never fully healed, couldn't heal. Every winter brought respiratory illness. Every spring brought fever. The wound was a permanent door into her skull, and eventually something walked through that door that her body couldn't fight. She dies in a shared room with 11 other women, all disfigured, all outcasts. The hospice isn't charity, it's containment, a place to put the marked women so the city doesn't have to look at them. No family attends her death. Her husband remarried within a year of her conviction. Her 2 children, ages 7 and 9 when she was convicted, were legally declared, offspring of uncertain parentage and barred from inheritance. They disappeared from records entirely. Margarita is buried in the pauper's field outside the city walls. No marker, no name, just a body in a quicklime pit with 47 others who died that winter. The hospice paid 3 soldi for the mass burial. This is noted in the ledger. It is the only record that she died. The woman who was paraded through the Piazza del Campo, who was made an example, who served as a warning for 37 years, she ends in an unmarked hole in the ground, unglamorous, forgotten, erased. But before we dig her up, you need to understand one final dimension of the horror. Margarita was a merchant's wife. She was common. For her, the punishment was exposure, public, visible, permanent. But what if she had been noble? What if she had money? The machine had a gear for them too. For the wealthy, the goal wasn't to display the woman, it was to delete her. If you were poor, they took your face. If you were rich, they took your sky. In the 14th century, noblewomen convicted of adultery faced immurement, walled in. The woman would be placed in a single room, sometimes a cell built specifically for the purpose. The masons would come and brick up the door row by row until only a small slot remained for food. Blanche of Burgundy, a French princess, spent 12 years in a cell at Chateau Gaillard. Underground, no light, no visitors, no conversation, just the damp stone and the silence. She went in a royal beauty. She died a broken, raving skeleton. The system ensured that no matter who you were, if you were a woman who broke the code, you were erased. The poor became monsters. The rich became ghosts. And that erasure was intentional. Because here's what happened over the next 3 centuries. The story changed. The evidence was curated. History was rewritten to protect the image of medieval Christendom. During the Renaissance, when scholars started compiling histories of Italian city-states, the mutilation laws became awkward. How do you celebrate the glorious achievements of medieval Florence, Siena, Venice, when your municipal archives are full of detailed accounts of cutting women's noses off? You edit. The statutes of Frederick II were quietly amended in later copies. The rhinotomy clause was removed from several manuscripts. It still exists in the original 1231 constitutions of Melfi, but the popular editions printed in the 16th and 17th centuries, gone. Footnoted as punishment according to custom, without specifying what that custom was. Church records were even more actively scrubbed. During the Counter-Reformation, dioceses across Europe were ordered to correct their archives, removing anything that made the medieval church look cruel or greedy. Consistory court records were destroyed wholesale. Of an estimated 200,000 cases heard in French ecclesiastical courts between 1200 and 1500, fewer than 8,000 survive in complete form. The rest? Burned, water damaged. Lost to time. But you can't burn everything. You can't erase bones. Jump to 2003, Cambridge, England. The archaeology unit of the university is excavating the site of a medieval hospital, St Mary Magdalene's Leper Hospital, in use from 1189 to 1542. They find 317 skeletons. Most show signs of leprosy, as expected. But 14 skeletons, all female, show something else entirely. Nasal bone trauma, deliberate, surgical. The cuts are too clean to be disease, too precise to be accident. The bone shows remodelling, evidence that the women live for years, sometimes decades, after the amputation. One skull shows 40 years of bone growth after the nasal structure was removed. These aren't lepers, these are rhinotomy victims, women who were mutilated and then dumped in leper hospitals because there was nowhere else to put them. The marked and the diseased housed together, both considered contagious, both considered warnings. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Sarah Inskip, runs the findings through comparative databases. Similar skeletons appear in excavations across Europe: Winchester, England, Toulouse, France, Lübeck, Germany. Always in hospital graveyards. Always women. Always the same surgical pattern. The physical proof that the archives tried to hide. One skull in particular stands out, catalogued as Skeleton 317. Female, 30 to 35 years old at time of nasal amputation. Lived another 30 to 40 years after, buried with no grave goods, no marker, in the paupers section of the cemetery. The bone structure suggests northern Italian origin. The time frame matches late 13th century. The location, a hospice graveyard, matches the trajectory of outcasts dumped at the edges of society. We can't prove it's Margarita, but it could be. It's certainly someone like her. Someone whose face was removed to prove a point. Someone who lived for decades as a ghost. Someone who died unmourned and was buried in quicklime. Someone whose bones refused to be erased. So what does this story teach us? It teaches us that systematic cruelty doesn't require monsters. It requires bureaucracy. It requires good people who believe they're enforcing necessary order. It requires economic incentives dressed up as moral imperatives. The men who designed this system weren't cackling villains. They were educated, pious. They wrote legal treatises. They endowed churches. They believed genuinely that they were protecting society from chaos. And that's the terrifying part, because the machine that destroyed Margarita wasn't built by sadists. It was built by lawyers, priests, town councils, respectable men doing respectable jobs. They wrote everything down because they were proud of their work. They thought they were building civilization. The same mechanisms exist today. Different targets, different justifications, same structure. The monetization of moral panic. The weaponization of shame. The use of legal systems to erase certain categories of people while enriching the institutions doing the erasing. We like to think we've evolved past this, that we're more enlightened, more humane. But the bones tell a different story. They tell us that sophisticated societies are perfectly capable of sophisticated cruelty. That education and culture don't prevent atrocity, they just make it more organised. The ledger of shadows exists because these stories were deliberately buried, because the archives were scrubbed, because the bones were thrown into unmarked pits. But bones don't lie. Documents, eventually, resurface. And the truth, the ugly, systematic, bureaucratic truth, refuses to stay buried. Margherita di Tommaso was not an anomaly. She was the system working exactly as designed. We'd like to believe that system is dead. We'd like to believe we left that machine back in the 14th century, but if you listen closely in the silence between the laws we write and the people we erase, you can still hear it. Iron on stone, 3 pounds on oak, fist, not knuckle, waiting for the door to open.